This video is looking to address the strength and stability of the FluxWrap-It stove. So here we have an 8-pound, 3.6 kilogram weight on top of the FluxWrap-It stove. You can see it supports that without any issues. So having addressed the strength capabilities of the stove, let's look at the stability issue. The stove is designed to be a top-lit updraft stove with rocket stove features. It's a hybrid between the two, and it does that by having a large chamber or tall chamber to which you can actually add a second flex wrap to it. It allows you to adjust the height, add a chimney, and also a pot skirt to act as a windshield and keep the heat trapped close to the surface, so you can transfer heat not just through the bottom but through the sides of a pot. You can adjust the flux wrap or the second flux wrap up and down. So if you've got a lower cap, you can put a cap on here and just cover the cap as such, and then you can put it down even lower, and you can choke off some of the air coming in here for when you want to grill and turn the flames down, and you can put a pan on it. So let's talk about the basic flex wrap itself and how we've got it configured here. So what we have here is the flex wrap set to a diameter of about 4.5 inches, and I'll say why 4.5 inches in a minute, which means that we have an overlap when we do the flex wrap here, from here to here, of about 2.25 inches. We've got 4 flex clips on there, and those are set. These are the version 2 with the feet bent over, so we've got greater surface area to stop it digging into soil. And when we set this up, we set it up so that we have, if I'm going out of the camera, there you go, the spring on the outside here of the flex wrap, and then that pushes the foot out by about 1/4 inch. So on a 4.5 inch diameter flex wrap, we've actually got a diameter between these two endpoints here of about 5 inches. And that's important for a couple of reasons. It gives us a wider base on the bottom, which is a wider pivot point, which we'll talk about shortly, and increases the stability of the flex wrap. Now we've set it at 4.5 inches because we're going to be using it with a bottle. And our bottles range here, actually including this one over on the end here, this one has got a diameter of about 2.8 inches. This one's about 3.3, and these are about 3.5, 3.6 inches on these latter two bottles. That base is set so that when we put our bottle on here, we actually have 1/2 inch gap all the way around. And I'll bring this up here, so we have that 1/2 inch gap going through so that air can flow and exhaust up through the flex wrap, giving us still that 1/2 inch gap all the way through, so the air can come up and flow. If we didn't have the 1/2 inch gap at this point here, there would be nowhere for the air to go, and we would stifle the fire completely. So to use it with a bottle, we have to have the 1/2 inch gap. I'll put the bottles out here. Let's just have a look at this, how we have the setup here. We have it set up with 4 limbs on our adjustable pot support, and that maximizes the amount of space that we have for the bottle to sit on, and importantly reduces the gaps, these gaps here, where the bottle can actually tip into, and I'll show you that in a minute. Now, you'll also note that we don't have our spacers on here. There's no requirement when we're using the bottle and we're using the FluxWrap to have the spacer on. Here I'm just showing, putting the spacer on here, just on one of them to show. We only need to put this on if we're actually putting a pan on here that actually needs to sit off because it's a wider diameter, so that we can have airflow coming through that gap. If we put it on a pan on here and we don't have that spacer, then we're blocking the airflow through the system. But with the 1/2 inch gap required, when we're using the bottle and the FluxWrap, then there's no need to have the spacer, and we can just sit the bottle on. So let's talk about the bottle, and I'm going to use these two extremes to demonstrate the point here. But if I have 2 bottles, or in fact on the stove itself, the issue we've got is tipping, is the stability issue. And the tipping comes from a pivot point and where the center of gravity is. And all of these bottles are filled with 1 liter of water, so they're all got the same amount of water, same weight, near enough, although the bottles do vary a little bit in weight themselves. But this bottle is wider than this one, which is also taller. So the center of gravity of this bottle is higher up than it is for this one. Also, it's got a narrow pivot point, so as soon as that center of gravity passes over that pivot point, it's going to topple. Same here, when this center of gravity passes over this pivot point, it's going to topple. But because of the relationship between the height and the thickness, if I tilt these 2 bottles, this one is already reaching its pivot point, i.e. it's falling this way, whereas this one is falling backwards. And you can see this one can go a fair distance over compared, let's see if we can get 2 points. Those are about the 2 balance points to show you the difference between the tipping and the stability of those bottles. So irrespective of the stove, you've got a tipping issue with bottles. And so I would not recommend using this bottle unless I was actually going to probably suspend it from a tripod where the center of gravity issue goes away completely, and I can quite happily suspend that and swing it around. And not have to worry about tipping issues. But with a bottle, I've got the tipping issue. So let's take this top off because I wouldn't have that on there. And this bottle has actually got quite a long neck, not as tall as it seems. So here we have the bottle. And now let's look at the tipping issue in conjunction with the stove. And there are a couple of things to watch. That gap that I told you about, that you guessed with cross pieces, which is going to be at the... If I tip the bottle in the direction so that it goes into one of those gaps, then there we go. I don't know if you can see that, but let's move this around a little way. I can maybe show it better this way. If I tip this bottle now and it falls in here, the stove is not tilted. It's the bottle tilting into this, and it's purely now the stability of the bottle that's taking effect there. If on the other hand I tilt it along one of the limb lengths so that it actually is tilting now, the whole unit becomes to tilt. And now the center of gravity is here and my pivot point is here. So I've actually got to bring that center of gravity way over. In fact, pivot center of gravity looks to be about here. Bring it way over so I can see, you can see the tilt on that, but if I leave go of the bottle now, you can see it'll just rock back. So it's fairly stable over quite a reasonable degree. In fact, what we have is we have the space that we require here for the stove to work effectively, which is 1/2 inch on each side. So the diameter's got to be, and this is where we have the 4.5 inches, because these bottles are about 3.5 inches. So the extra inch in the diameter, 1/2 inch on each side, plus 1/4 inch on the feature, so I'm getting 3/4 of an inch away from the center of, from this pivot point of the bottle itself. So I've increased my stance, so it's still a relatively stable setup if you are using it with a 1/2 inch space. Your problem comes is if you just bring the FluxWrap-It to be only the width of the bottle. If you do that, then you actually have to put your FluxWrap around, and to get any airflow whatsoever, you actually would have to put the spacer on here to raise the bottle up to give it air. So that's not the way to use it. The way to use it is just to have the half inch spacer, which then automatically stabilizes your bottle. If you use it with the spacer and then put the FluxWrap around it where air gets up and the 1/2 inch is created here rather than on the bottom piece, you've reduced it now to the width of the bottle, and your stability of your system is very much compromised, because you're basically now bringing the pivot point in by at least 3/4 of an inch. And so it becomes vastly less stable when you do that. So using the FluxWrap as it is, it's a relatively stable situation. Stability is also increased when you actually put wood in the stove, because that increases or decreases the center of gravity down, and also since the wood goes down through to the base, it actually gives more points of contact on the surface. So, FluxWrap-It stove, relatively stable if set up correctly. Your real stability issues come in when you narrow the stove too much, and when you do that, you'll not benefit from the real design of the stove, which is to give you that pot skirt windshield combination and high draft flow of the system, which gives you the clean burn-in and rapid boil times.